Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. During World War II, while the Iowa-class battleships may have been designed to slug it out with enemy battleships, probably their most iconic use was as anti-aircraft escorts for the aircraft carriers. While these ships were highly successful at that role, it is a highly undignified role for a 57,000-ton warship like this. The U.S. Navy knew that, so they built a whole class of ships specifically dedicated to the anti-aircraft warfare role. And that was relatively unique to the United States and Great Britain, which built a similar class of ships. In today's video, we're going to be comparing the Atlanta-class cruisers to Iowa-class battleships. I suspect the reason why the Allies make anti-aircraft ships dedicated, and you don't really see that with any of the Axis powers, is because the Allies had some really great anti-aircraft guns. The United States Navy thought very highly of its 5-inch 38 caliber gun. We're in the lower handling room, the 5-inch projectile magazine on Battleship New Jersey. And because the Navy developed this great anti-aircraft weapon system, they built an entire ship around it. While Japan, Germany, Italy, France, other countries during World War II did not have a true dedicated dual-purpose gun. The other country that tried to go with a dual-purpose gun, Great Britain, with their 5.25-inch secondary batteries on their battleships, they also made a class of cruisers, the Dittos, that are roughly comparable to the Atlantas and even predate them a little bit. But they're very similar design ships, just one is very American looking, one is very British looking. So, cruisers had two main roles: scouting for the fleets out ahead of their own ships and leading torpedo boat flotillas. Most American cruisers fall into the first role. Because the United States habitually did not have enough scouts for its fleet, never built battle cruisers, so many of the cruisers we built, even our quote-unquote light cruisers, the 6-inch armed 10,000-ton treaty cruisers, were still big scouting assets, just the same as the 8-inch heavy cruisers. However, the United States did build two classes of torpedo boat leaders, essentially. The Omaha-class cruisers of the 1920s, which were badly outdated by World War II, and the Atlanta-class cruisers. As destroyer leaders, the Atlantas have perhaps as much influence from the destroyers they were designed to serve alongside as they have from cruisers. They're the only American cruisers during World War II, except the Omaha class, that are armed with torpedoes. They're the only class of American cruisers during World War II that have sonar, depth charge racks, and depth charge throwers. They are exclusively armed with 5-inch guns, while larger cruisers are armed with 6 or 8-inch guns. So they are pretty unique in the history of the U.S. Navy cruisers, and they represent part of an iterative design evolution that ends very shortly after World War II. Again, cruise missiles, surface-to-air missiles, eliminate the use for a gun-based anti-aircraft cruiser. So you see, just depending on how you count them, 3 or 4 generations of these ships in the American Navy. So you've got the base Atlanta class, which represents 4 ships, and then you've got the Oakland subclass, which were the second 4 ships, and they've received some modifications while under construction that we got from operational experience with the first 4 ships. After that, there were 3 ships in the subclass known as the Juno II class, named after one of the original Atlanta-class cruisers. And these ships fit very nicely into the post-war building scheme. So at the end of the war, the U.S. Navy had 3 types of cruisers: the 8-inch armed Baltimores, the 6-inch armed Clevelands, and the 5-inch armed Atlantas. Because we had so many of these ships, but we still had new technology, each one of these got a 3-ship subclass runoff that was basically the same hull, but with some wartime experience thrown in. So for the Atlantas, those are the Junos. For the Clevelands, those become the Fargos. And for the Baltimores, those become the Oregon Cities. Well, those were just a placeholder for true, dedicated, more modern cruisers. So for the Baltimore class, that design ends with Salem, or the Des Moines class cruisers, of which Salem is still around for you to visit today. And then we go to missiles and we leave that behind. The 6-inch armed class ends with the Worcesters, which also feature auto-loading 6-inch turrets. They look a lot like an Atlanta, but they're actually in the Cleveland design family, not in the Atlanta family. The Atlanta class culminates with the CL-154 design, which is the only one of these classes to not be built. But that was basically taking an Atlanta and upgunning it from the 5-inch 38 to the 5-inch 54. So there's a broad history of U.S. Navy cruiser design during the war and post-war, and where the Atlantas fit into it. The Atlantas themselves are some of the smallest cruisers operated during World War II. At standard displacement, they're about 6,500 tons. At full load, they get overloaded during the war to about 8,500 tons. So whereas your average treaty cruiser is 10,000 tons, these ships are built significantly smaller than that. They are 541 feet long, 52 feet wide, and they draw about 20 feet of water. So a little bit bigger than a destroyer, smaller than most cruisers, definitely smaller than an Iowa-class battleship. They create 75,000 horsepower, which gets them up to about 32 knots when fully loaded. And they can steam for about 8,500 nautical miles, just over half of the range of an Iowa-class battleship. They just aren't as large. They don't have as much fuel tank capacity, as much bunkerage. Easily, the most striking feature of this class of ship is their armament. And this is also the feature that changes the most throughout the war and from subclass to subclass. As built, an Atlanta-class cruiser at a 6,500 ton displacement carried 16 5-inch guns, 3 stacked on top of each other in twin mounts at the bow, 3 more at the stern, and 2 in wing positions next to the torpedo tubes on the side of the ship. They also carried 4 quadruple 1.1-inch Chicago pianos, the 6 20mm guns, and 8 21-inch torpedo tubes, in addition to sonar, depth charge throwers, the whole destroyer suite. The first members of this class enter service in early 1942 and immediately go into escorting the carrier task forces. Off Guadalcanal, they are plugged in with so many other escort ships into the meat grinder that is Iron Bottom Sound. As we shot through our first-rate cruisers and our 6-inch cruisers, they just threw the Atlantas in because they were what they had. And so Atlanta and Juno became 2 of the 3 light cruisers that the United States lost during World War II. Both were sunk in November of 1942. Atlanta outright in combat, and Juno was disabled, making her way from the combat zone when she was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine, famously going down with all 5 Sullivan brothers on board. So these ships, despite having massive dual-purpose firepower, didn't hold up well in surface combat. And so they aren't used for that much for the rest of the war. They purely escort the aircraft carriers. And by the Korean War, only one of them is left to see service. Only one of the subclasses left to see service, and the following class is deleted entirely. While they carry massive firepower, the larger cruisers of the fleet also had significant anti-aircraft firepower, but could also work in a surface role or a shore bombardment role, and so those ships were retained instead. Plus, they had the reserve of buoyancy to be supplemented with missiles, and the Atlantas were thoroughbreds. That design went to every ton that they were able to put on that ship and still keep them afloat. They put absolutely everything they could into them. So there was nothing left for new technology. This becomes especially apparent when you look at the changes made to the class. The Oakland subclass loses 2 of the twin 5-inch gun mounts to take her down to 12 5-inch guns, but they increase the 40mm battery to 16 mounts, and these replace the original 1.1-inch guns. Also increases the 20mm battery to 16, and for a time retains the torpedo tubes. But every time a new radar comes out or some other new technology comes out, you have to strip off more guns and more torpedo tubes to make room for it. By the time you get to the Juno 2 class, you see the battery change again. 12 5-inch guns still. Again, the wing turrets are removed, so it's still 3 twin turrets forward, 3 twin turrets aft. 32 40mm guns and 16 20mm guns. And by this time, the torpedoes are gone, the depth charges are gone. These ships really suffered from mission creep. They were designed to be anti-aircraft ships. They were very good anti-aircraft ships, but when you try to operate them with destroyers and add surface firepower, surface torpedo power, and anti-submarine weapons, you're adding a lot of weight and a lot of explosives that these ships just aren't able to accommodate. And so you see it gradually being peeled off as the war goes on. They get more radars, they get more modern anti-aircraft guns. So the ships of the class: Atlanta and Juno, San Diego and San Juan. Then the Oakland subclass, you have Oakland, Reno, Flint, and Tucson. And then the Junos, the Juno 2s, you've got Juneau, Spokane, and Fresno. And then, of course, the CL-154 class, which was never named. We're not quite sure how many would have been authorized if the Navy had have chosen to go that route. These ships have 14 5-inch guns that they could fire on the broadside, which is 2 more mounts than an Iowa-class battleship can. So in terms of size, armor, firepower, any of that stuff, these are significantly smaller than an Iowa. They don't compare well. In a surface gunfight, forget about it. But for what they were designed to do, as an anti-aircraft ship, they bring more anti-aircraft firepower to a fight than an Iowa-class battleship does. And you could build all 8 Atlantas for the resources that go into a single Iowa-class battleship. These ships probably have more firepower per ton, more guns per ton than any other ship ever built, despite being mid-sized to small in terms of warships during World War II. And they were absolutely critical for protecting American aircraft carrier task groups during World War II, throughout all the carrier battles, basically from Midway on. So if it's an air raid, I would want to be on an Atlanta more than any other ship. But if it's literally anything else, I'll stick with New Jersey. What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below for more ways you can donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.